Psalm 3, the title to this is Exercising Faith in Troubling Times. And this really goes along with a series of messages over the last several months. Maybe once every 2 months or so, I'll preach on a subject, and I'm trying to tie in this theme of troubling times. We've looked at having hope in troubling times, as confident expectation, navigating troubling times. This is exercising faith in troubling times. Now, I'd like just to read through the psalm. Look here at Psalm 3. We're going to start with the small statement just right under the title, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. We'll make reference to that. It says, Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. Selah. So just pause there for a moment. Think about that. That is the setting. This is a prayer, but that is the setting that's pushing David to pray. And then look at this contrast in verse 3. This is significant. You can circle it, underline it, mark it, just take note of this. But thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, my glory, and the lifter up of my head. I cried unto the Lord with my voice. Have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for thou hast smitten all my enemies upon the cheekbone. Thou hast broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongeth unto the Lord. Thy blessing is upon thy people. Selah. Well, the situation here is troubling times, and as I was looking at this, I really was reflecting on this psalm even before we took our trip. I was considering preparing a sermon on this psalm and preaching it while we were down in Houston. I ended up selecting another psalm to preach on at that time when we were down there. But I came back to it and really prepared this for us here tonight. But it didn't really ring with me the connection between this psalm and a significant event in our own lives. Until just earlier this afternoon, I had a run into town. I really enjoy listening to sermons. I don't know if you like to do that. I like to do that in what I have as any sort of time frame where I'm going from point A to point B, walking, whatever. Even if I'm doing something in the home, I like to, listen to something while I'm doing it. Well, I wanted to listen to a sermon. I actually set one up that my daughter had sent to me. And it came to mind as I was sitting in the car just getting that all ready before I took a little ride into town. I think Pastor Minnick preached on this. This is a pastor down in Greenville, South Carolina. And I think I'm going to pull that up. And when I got to it, there were a few things that struck me. One is, it was preached at the beginning of the year, and he used it in a series beginning of the year in 2009 as kind of an entrance into the whole year. But what really struck me is that maybe in the back of my mind, I could have pulled this forward as that's the sermon. But back in 2013, in summer 2013, we were in Cameroon. And about a week and a half earlier, our co-workers, who you know very well, the Lochers, were robbed. The thieves stayed in their house for well over an hour, I believe it was. It's a very difficult situation. But here on this one day, my wife was driving around, and this sermon that he preached on this text, entitled, I believe, something like Anticipating Troubling Times, or Anticipating Trouble, I think is the name of it. He preached on this text, and as I was listening to it, immediately it came back to mind. This was the sermon that Christine listened to the very day of which, that night, the bandits came to our home. And the thing that was really interesting in that sermon, because I listened to it after we were already robbed, and I listened to it several times. It was very helpful to me just to kind of help to fill in the ruts of wrong thinking regarding what we had gone through. That, if you've ever been through a situation like that, that's very, very possible. You just make these ruts, and it's kind of that dealing with that stress in what took place. And I listened to it for several times, but right in the beginning of that, Pastor Nick says something like this. He says, now what David is dealing with here is the anticipation of someone actually coming and trying to injure him. Then he makes this comment. Now, I don't think there's anyone here, and that's your fear or concern today. That was exactly the case the very night that Christine listened to this earlier that day. Is that somebody did come and they shattered our door and broke into our home while we were there with knives in hand. And so as I reflect on that today, I didn't get to listen to the whole sermon, I just had a little bit of a trip, but it just really struck me of how this is just something good for us to meditate on, and good right now. So exercising faith in troubling times. The situation is troubling times. We already said that's in verses 1 and 2. But notice this about the trouble that David was experiencing. If you look at it, the trouble has a threefold emphasis. It's like he's saying over and over and over a particular statement to really show us, or to really just emphasize the trouble of the situation. You see that? It's actually repeated 3 times, but what you're going to see is verse 1, many are they that rise up against me. Verse 2, many there be which say of my soul, there's no help for him with God. But there is another time that word is used. It's up earlier. How are they increased? Same word translated many. Here we have this. We have a threefold emphasis that shows the condition of David's situation. And it's not only that, it is by a twofold assault. Enemies or opposition, that is adversaries, those which were coming to oppress him or rise up against him. And then mockers, those who are really mocking his faith. And we can make comment about this, that this kind of mockery of our faith and our trust in the Lord doesn't always have to come from somebody outside ourselves. Right? It can come from our own souls. You consider the situation. You know what David did. You know his sin with Bathsheba. You know how he murdered Uriah through the sword of a foreign nation. You know the judgment against David that was going to be through his own house. So this mockery didn't really even need to come from someone outside of himself, though in the case here it was, that it was risen up from his own soul. And isn't that the case for us so many times? Our own soul cries out to us, you're not worthy. This kind of trouble, this should come upon you. Close your mouth, don't pray. This is your just due. In the situation here, there's no reason to doubt this. In fact, one commentator says this, there's no internal evidence that brings into doubt the authenticity of the superscription, and that is the situation that he was fleeing from Absalom, his son. His own son was coming to take the throne, and he was going to kill his father. And so this is most certainly a troubling time. But David's response in this prayer is really found in verse 3. But thou, O Lord. That's it. And that is going to be where we're going to see this man's faith and how he exercises faith in troubling times. So there's 5 different ways. If you look at your paper, there's 5 different ways to exercise faith in troubling times. I'd like to encourage us in 2022 that we would do the same. I know, like I said earlier, after going through that robbery, I listened to this sermon on Psalm 3 multiple times. In fact, I'm kind of wondering why I didn't connect it up earlier in my preparation. I just slammed me later in the day that, you know what, this is the one. This is that sermon. I know how great of a help it was and how we really could just find help throughout this year coming back to these truths again and again. The first point is simply this: establish the E there on point 1. Establish your faith in the Lord, verse 3. But thou, O Lord, art a shield, my glory, the lifter up of my head. And I do just want to make a point again about the but thou. But thou is where he's taking the unseen reality and he's mixing it in with his present experience. And that really is what faith has to do. It has to take something that is just as real as the trouble you are going through. In fact, you have more certainty about the unseen reality because it's a person, he has a character, he has a way, he has promises, he has all of that. You've got to take that and mix it in with the very situation you're in. One commentator stated it this way: but when a believer gazes too long at his enemies, the force arrayed against him seems to grow in size until it appears to be overwhelming. When he turns his thoughts to God, God is seen in his true great stature, and the enemies shrink. Isn't that exactly what will happen? Our minds will just build up and magnify the trouble. What we need is to bring in that unseen reality. We need to bring Jehovah into the entirety of our situation. Well, there's three things here, three realities that must be established. We're going to establish our faith in the Lord. There's three things. These aren't on your sheet. This is just where you can fill it in if you like, on the little lines under point 1. This is under point 1. Three realities, and they're found in the three different parts of verse 3. But thou, the Lord, art a shield for me. Well, a shield during the time of the kings of Israel would be something very beautiful and ornate and up on the wall. Just an ornate decoration. It would be a symbol of power. That's not all what's being spoken of here. What's being spoken of here is that which a warrior holds to defend himself. And that is the idea. Psalm 28:7, the Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusted in him, and I am helped. That's exactly what happens when what you put between yourself and the trouble is Jehovah. And you hide behind him. That's exactly what must be done. In establishing our faith, we hide behind Jehovah. Secondly, under that, we have this, says in verse 3 again, but thou, Lord, art a shield for me, my glory. Now that's going to be kind of hard to maybe understand my glory. We wouldn't necessarily talk of something else or of someone else as my glory. What exactly is David saying here? Really, you have to kind of wrestle around with this a little bit. I'd like to give you what I believe he's saying. The basic idea for the word glory, it refers to the physical weight of something, or the massive quantity of something. And you could think of it this way. We do have a phrase in English. We could say something like this: I'm putting a lot of weight upon this. Everybody say like that? You hear somebody say that? He's putting a lot of weight on that. I think that's the idea here. Applied to Jehovah, if Jehovah is your glory, he's not only very important to you, or the one of greatest importance to you. In context, in respect to your troubles, he is the only one of importance and weight for you. He is your glory. He is the entirety of it. You are glorying in him as the only one to help. He is your glory. And lastly, it says here in verse 3, that also is the lifter up of my head. And the idea here simply is that Jehovah is the one that must bring deliverance. And if it's not from Jehovah, then it's going to be none at all. The idea here is absolute. That he is the one. There isn't another. He is the one that must lift up David's head, not just in the sense of from the shame of what's going on, but in the idea of restoring him to his throne. And we make the applications to ourselves. Psalm 27, verses 5 and 6, for in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion, in the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock, and now shall my head be lifted up above mine enemies round about. It's that same idea. One commentary said about this, the answer is that he has turned his attention from his enemies to God, or from his troubles to God. That is exactly what we see, that but thou, O Lord. Some people, some believers, strong believers even, who have a strong devotional life with the Lord, who are people of prayer, sometimes they struggle in this area of bringing the unseen reality into the midst of their troubles. It is exactly what must be done. And if somebody struggles with what David easily could have struggled with, what the mockery is crying out in verse 2, there's no help for him in God. Here, you sinned against the Lord. You killed Uriah. You took Bathsheba. There's a judgment upon your house. You're just reaping what you've sown. We need to understand, remember that the Lord and his bounty to us is a bounty of grace. And it really is comforting, isn't it? That David in this situation, even under the chastening hand of God, finds the confidence to establish his faith on these three realities we're going to look. Doesn't back off. He's confessed his sin, and he is laying hold on Jehovah alone. That's very comforting. Second point here on our outline is this: build your faith in the Lord. Build your faith in the Lord. It says in verse 4, I cried unto the Lord my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. Now, how can you build your faith for your present troubles? Well, one key would be to reflect upon or to recognize how God has intervened for you in the past. Now, this is the past tense of verse 4. That is the idea. Now, there's two possibilities. One is it's the present past. It's what just happened and how God has brought him through the night. He's going to talk about waking up the next day, the very next verse, that the Lord sustained him. It could be that. But I believe that this goes deeper than that. It goes back all the way to his experience in response to how God delivered him from the hand of Saul and all of his enemies. And the reason I say that is because of this. If you go over to 2 Samuel 22, and you go to the Song of David, just listen to this. David spake unto the Lord the words of this song in the day that the Lord delivered him out of the hand of his enemies, of all his enemies, and out of the hand of Saul. And he said, the Lord is my rock and my fortress, my deliverer, the God of my rock, in him will I trust. He is my shield, the horn of my salvation, my high tower, my refuge, my Savior. Thou savest me from violence. I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. Now, we're not going to read the entirety of that song. But you get down to verse 7. Now, I'm going to read verse 7, and you look over here at this verse 4 in chapter 3. In Psalm 3. Look at Psalm 3, verse 4. I'm going to read the song written earlier in 2 Samuel 22, verse 7. Here it is. In my distress, I called upon the Lord and cried to my God, and he did hear my voice out of his temple, and my cry did enter into his ears. You see the similarity there? Absolutely. It's not exact, it's not quoting, but what I'm trying to say is this. I believe that this was David's heartbeat all the way back and then all the way through his life. That for him, he looked at what God had done to build his faith in what God would do. And certainly that is what we must do. The third point here on our sheet is to act in faith in the Lord. Act in faith in the Lord. And I'm going to take that from verse 5. I laid me down and slept. I awake, for the Lord sustained me. Now, what does it mean to act in faith? Very simply, just look at the at the idea. I first say this, you've got a lot of points here on your handout. I apologize for that. But if you just follow along, I'll try to highlight them. The first one is this: faith is non-presumptive. Non-presumptive. What do I mean by that? Why do I say that? Well, you notice here, he just lays down and goes to sleep. But he's not in Jerusalem. When Absalom was coming, what did David do? He fled. He went, he took measures to remove himself and his close entourage and to come out of that danger. Now, you could say, well, why did he have the faith just to lay down and sleep in Jerusalem? Well, he knew the intent, he knew the situation. Obviously, a spiritually minded person has to be very careful to pray through any kind of situation and to know is what is presumption here and what is a matter of faith. Being prudent in the book of Proverbs is exalted as something which a God-fearing man has and acts upon. And I think we can even find a model of this in the words of Christ himself, and even in his own conduct. I don't have that text here, but I do have his instruction to his disciples. In Matthew 10:23, he said this: but when they persecute you in this city, flee ye into another. That's not a lack of faith. It's not a lack of faith. Even Christ himself took certain actions. So for David to leave the city was not faith, it was prudence. But now came a time, it was a time for sleep, and he had a couple of choices. One was to worry and fret and to fight off sleep with all of his strength, to take the matter into his own hands. Well, the other was to commit it and entrust it unto the Lord and to lay down. I believe that's what he did. So faith is non-presumptive. David did flee for his life, but here he does come to sleep. And then faith is active. The next point there, some letter B, faith is active. I just like you could just take it from the imagery. I laid me down and slept. That's a tremendous picture of faith. Tremendous picture of faith. And then thirdly, faith is objective. That is, that it was in the Lord. Because he says that it's the Lord that sustained him. Faith is effective. It has an effect. He says, I awoke. And then lastly, faith is recognizant. Recognizant. That's a good kind of French new word, I think. But it's the fact that he, the next morning, took knowledge of the fact that the Lord did sustain him. And he rejoices in that. He recognizes it. So here it is to act in faith. It's not to be blind to what's going on. It's not to have a lack of prudence. It is active. It acts by resting in the Lord. He is the object of it. It's effective. The Lord does honor that. And then in the end, it does recognize that the Lord is done. It was the end. The last 2 points quickly is to overcome fear by faith in the Lord. Overcome fear. This is number 4. Overcome fear by faith in the Lord. Verse 6, I think this is really instructive. This is what it says. And he is speaking, writing. This is a prayer. He's speaking, he's writing, he's making it known. He's speaking before God. He's speaking to his own soul. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about. And just 2 simple points. One is that we must direct our hearts. We must direct our hearts. We must take fear and quench fear by faith in the Lord. And it must be something that's absolute. Notice it's an exaggeration. There's 10,000s of people round about him, no way of escape, and an enemy that he can never have any hope of conquering. And he says, even if it's something that I cannot conquer, no escape, there's no fear. I will not be afraid. I reject fear. And we can do the same. Without presumption, in the fear of God, we can reject fearful response. And it must be done. And he does it here. That's very helpful, very instructive to us. And then lastly, simply this is to pray in faith in the Lord. Verses 7 and 8. Arise, Lord, save me, O my God. Thou hast smitten all mine enemies upon the cheekbone. Thou hast broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongeth unto the Lord. Thy blessing is upon thy people. Selah. And that is what faith does, isn't it? When one man said this, it's paraphrased, language of faith is easily learned. But true faith is seen in the frequency and fervency of prayer. And that certainly is the case here. As he closes this psalm, we don't have an answer. We don't have an answer in the psalm itself. We have an answer in the historical book. We don't have an answer in the psalm itself. He closes it, committing the entirety of the matter to the Lord. And sometimes, even for long, isn't it true? Sometimes for long seasons of time, we find ourselves in a prayer position. So as we go into these coming months, into this year, that we ourselves will just be instructed out of the psalm to exercise our faith in the Lord in troubling times. Let's pray.